Genesis chapter 9, verse 5. We saw in the prior verse that God has given every animal now to Noah and his family for food, but had a special provision about the blood of life in it. Now we're going to see a bit of an explanation as to why that is. Kaigar ta humeteron hema ton suchon humon exeteso. Ek keras panton ton therion exeteso alta. Kai ek keras anthropu adelphu exeteso ten suchen tu anthropu. Now, once again, the syntax here is a bit tricky, and that's because partly the Hebrew source is a little bit tricky. You have to do a little bit of hard work to make sense of it. And there's really just one sort of tricky verb here. We'll talk about that, but let's try to sort of diagnose what exactly is being said here. We'll start with the kai gar, which is not super common, I suppose. You would expect the kai here to be the conjunction, but you have the postpositive gar. So basically the idea is for, so it's tying back to 9-4. And then the kai here is going to be something like indeed or also. For indeed. So it's trying to explain the prior few verses. Ta humeteron. Humeteros means your. It's the different form of the homon there. It's adjectival, so it's your in the plural. For your blood. And then ton suchon humon. Of your life, something like that. So notice you have the humon versus the humeteron, but they basically mean the same thing. So your blood of life, exeteso. Now that's from exeteo. It's a first singular future active indicative. Now you might think, okay, that's zeteo, that means to search, and so ek might be to seek out or something like that. And in some contexts, that is indeed what it means. But if you look it up in a lexicon here, going back to Muriaka's lexicon, he says that Genesis 9:5 here falls into this particular category of to demand an account of. It's a requital, some sort of retribution, and typically has the accusative here. And so he has this exact verse as an example. So in other words, I will demand requital, recompense, demand an account of the blood of your life, because the life is in the blood. That's what he's saying. Then he goes on and explains a kind of legal principle, something like that. So ek keros, from the hand of all the therion, remember these are the wild beasts. Exeteso, I will demand an accounting. And then alta, referring back to the hema earlier. So in other words, if an animal spills your blood, the blood of your life, I will require it from that animal. In other words, that animal shall also have his blood spilled. There's a retribution there. And then also, ek keros anthropu. So if a man does the same thing, from the hand of man. Now there's a really interesting modifier here. And again, part of this is the Hebrew has this, but again, the word order is tricky in Hebrew. It's essentially appositional. From the hand of a man, namely a brother. Now that's partly to show if it's a particularly close relative who has spilt your blood, then that makes this sin even worse. But also it's true that Noah coming out of the ark has 3 boys, and they are brothers. And so even narrowly, it's referring to their own sense of fraternity. So from the hand of a man, namely a brother, I will demand an accounting. Same verb again. And he will demand an accounting for the life of a man, or of the man. That is the man whose blood has been spilled. In other words, it's kind of a life-for-life kind of principle, but in this slightly circuitous way. And it specifically is heightened in this particular case if it is someone who is near to you, namely a brother. The basic idea here is God is not going to allow life, especially the life of a brother, to go unavenged. He will require punishment from either the animal that dealt the death blow or the other human, especially if it's a close relative for that. I just thought this was interesting. If you look this up in some of the critical editions, some manuscripts add an altu here after the adelphu. So it would be even more narrowly saying, look, if it's the life of his brother, if your own brother has been the one who spilt the blood, then he in particular will have to pay the penalty. And so if you look at Codex M, very commonly cited in the Göttingen editions, it's also Quislen 1, you'll see the end of the adelphu here. So you got your phi, omicron, upsilon, and then you see the exeteso. So that's where we are here. And notice he puts a little thing above it, a little text critical indicator, and it's in the margin. And notice you have the altu. Now that may look like alta, but this is a ligature here. That's the Omicron Upsilon ligature. And so the original scribe didn't put it in there, but it looks like actually it might be the same hand added it in the margin. So you'll see that reflected, for instance, in the Göttingen edition. So just kind of a fun little way to get back to some manuscript work, see what that looks like. Wait a second, I left out the his brother, so he adds it there in the margin. That even further narrows it. Now, most editors do not take that to be the original reading, nor is that in the Hebrew, but it's just interesting to show that some of the scribes are interpreting it in that way. So that's Genesis 9:5.